Welcome to Still Unanswered. I'm Elena Cortez. Today, we're returning to a story that has haunted Fort Worth for more than 5 decades. The Fort Worth missing trio, Rachel Trlica, Renee Wilson, and Julie Moseley, who vanished on December 23, 1974, from the Seminary South Shopping Center. This episode is somber, reflective, and haunting, with a quiet hope that renewed attention could bring answers. Marcus, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Elena. It's good and hard to be here. I've studied cases like this for years, and the trio story is one that sticks with you. The mix of missing bodies, a puzzling letter, and families who never stopped searching makes it a particularly wrenching cold case.
Right. Before we get into the weeds, I want to ground listeners in the central facts, the verifiable things, not rumors. On December 23, 1974, 3 girls disappeared after a day of Christmas shopping at Seminary South Shopping Center in Fort Worth. Rachel was 17, Renee was 14, and Julie was 9. Rachel was driving a 1972 Oldsmobile 98 that was later found in the Sears parking lot with gifts and school books inside. The girls never returned home.
Exactly. And those simple facts are important because they shape what's plausible and what isn't. The car being found, the presents left inside, the ages and family situations, these are the pieces investigators keep returning to when evaluating theories.
Let's talk about who these girls were. Rachel, Mary Rachel Trlica, though she went by Rachel, was 17, married for about 6 months, attending Southwest High School. Small, about 5 feet tall, long brown hair, and she wore her wedding ring. Rusty Arnold, her brother, later became the most visible family advocate for the case. Her mother, Fran Langston, would also keep the case alive for decades.
And Renee Wilson, 14, 9th grader, described as excited that day because she'd just gotten a promise ring from her boyfriend, Terry Moseley. She had layaway items to pick up earlier that day, which suggests a normal, planned shopping trip rather than something impulsive.
Julie Moseley was only 9, a small girl with sandy blonde hair and multiple small scars. Under her left eye, one on her forehead, a mark on the back of her calf. Julie hadn't been supposed to go at first. She begged, and her mother relented. That very human scene, a kid pleading to be included in last-minute shopping, makes this case feel unbearable, honestly.
It does, and those family details matter in evaluating the runaway narrative that popped up early on. A 9-year-old with no money, a 14-year-old looking forward to a party, and a 17-year-old who was married and in school. Those aren't classic hallmarks of 3 kids jointly deciding to vanish 2 days before Christmas.
Let's walk through the timeline of that day. Morning and early afternoon, they planned to go to the mall. They went first to a surplus store where Renee had layaway items. Then they arrived at Seminary South, sometime late morning to early afternoon by most reconstructions. Rachel parked the Oldsmobile, likely in the Sears upper lot. Witnesses say the mall was busy, as you'd expect 2 days before Christmas.
And by mid-afternoon, family members began to get annoyed first. Delayed teens are annoying, and then worried. Terry expected Renee back by about 4 p.m. for the party. Renee's mother was truly worried by 4 p.m. When the girl still hadn't returned by early evening, the search began.
At around 6 p.m., Renee's father and a neighbor went to the mall and found Rachel's car. Inside, presents, school books, personal items. The car appeared neatly parked. Now, that particular detail, the neat parking, has been debated. Some folks later suggested it could mean Rachel parked after a pleasant shopping trip and then left with someone she trusted. Others have said the car might have been moved and reparked later by someone involved. The truth is, we don't know which is accurate.
Right. The absence of obvious signs of struggle at the car is one reason early investigators considered the possibility of a voluntary departure. But absence of evidence at the vehicle doesn't equal absence of foul play. In a busy mall, a person could be intercepted in a way that left almost no trace near the car. Or the car could have been moved, handled, or processed in ways that obscured what happened. Scene management in 1974 was different too.
That's an important point. Marcus, can you unpack what investigative limitations in 1974 mean for a case like this?
Sure. First, there was no DNA profiling yet. Evidence collected then couldn't be analyzed now unless it was preserved. Fingerprint systems existed, but were much smaller and slower. Crime scene processing standards weren't as rigorous or as well-resourced as modern protocols. And crucially, the concept of treating a missing person as a potential abduction in the first hours wasn't as entrenched as it is today. All of that can mean either that evidence wasn't gathered, or what was gathered wasn't preserved or cataloged in a way that makes it useful now.
So when we talk about the car and the parking lot, it's not just, was there a sign of a struggle, but also, was the parking lot even processed thoroughly? From reporting, it's unclear how thoroughly the lot and the vehicle were forensically examined.
Yes, there are references to a partial fingerprint in broader coverage of Fort Worth cold cases, but it's not clear whether that print was tied to the Trio case or how useful it remains. The cold case unit today also has to contend with record preservation challenges across decades.
Let's bring up that letter. It's one of the most confounding pieces. On December 24th, the morning after the disappearance, a handwritten note arrived at Rachel's husband Tommy's home. It said, in essence, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in the Sears upper lot. Love, Rachel." The note referenced the correct car location, and the postmark was from Dallas. Yet people noticed oddities with the zip code. Marcus, what do investigators and handwriting experts make of that letter?
Handwriting analysis, including work by experts at the FBI over the years, was ultimately inconclusive. No one could definitively say Rachel wrote it. That ambiguity created space for the runaway theory early on, and that, in turn, likely diverted investigative energy. Families consistently and uniformly rejected the note as genuine. They called it a red herring, an attempt to mislead police and buy time for whoever was responsible.
Families were adamant. Julie's mother said she knew her daughter, and she knew the other girls. They wouldn't run off. Renee's mom said she was excited for the party and had just received a promise ring that morning. Rusty and others later described the letter as deliberate misdirection. The letter's accuracy about the car location and its odd zip anomaly suggests someone either was trying to be helpful or was trying to control the narrative. There are so many ways to read it, and we still don't have a definitive answer.
And that's the problem. If the letter was written by someone close enough to know details, it could mean complicity. Or it could mean someone got information secondhand. The only thing we can be confident about is that it complicated things. It gave law enforcement a plausible alternate hypothesis to follow, one that fit a neat story: kids who wanted to get away heading to Houston. That hypothesis was always at odds with the family's lived knowledge of the girls.
After the car was found and the letter arrived, the early investigation included the typical chaos of missing person cases. A flood of tips, some credible, many not. Families distributed flyers, contacted newspapers, and started their own searches. There were prank calls to the Moseley home. One 14-year-old admitted to making cruel calls, pretending to be Renee or Julie. Imagine the emotional toll that caused.
It's devastating. Prank calls and false leads are not just annoying, they're trauma re-experienced repeatedly. For a mother like Julie's, the phone rang and she screamed, fearing that any call could be the worst news. That kind of distress compounds grief over decades.
You touched on how families stayed active. Rusty, Rachel's brother, has become almost mythic in his relentless searches, digging holes, scouring lake bottoms, following tips. The family and community set up a Facebook page. Billboards were put up near the 50-year mark to generate tips, and the case has been invoked on Dateline and in local anniversary reporting.
And yet, the case remains unsolved. Over the years, police have investigated thousands of leads, interviewed hundreds of people, and conducted dozens of searches. A dedicated task force existed at one point, but the cold case unit now juggles around 1,000 cases. Resource constraints are real. That backlog affects how much time and attention any single case can receive.
This is where systemic failures meet personal tragedy. The family members often say they feel forgotten by a system overloaded with cases. Marcus, how common is that in cold case work?
Sadly, very common. Many jurisdictions only have a handful of cold case detectives dealing with a mountain of unresolved files, many of which date to eras before modern forensic tools. Priorities get triaged based on the credibility of new information and the likelihood of solvability. It's not a moral judgment, it's a resource allocation problem. But to families living every day with uncertainty, that bureaucratic reality feels like abandonment.
We need to pause and name the human price. The parents mostly passed away without answers. Rusty has said he's grown exhausted and would like to spend the rest of his time with family instead of an all-consuming search. Holidays are forever altered. One relative told reporters that you just can't bear waking up some mornings around Christmas. The family still lights 3 angels in the yard every holiday. That image keeps coming back to me.
It should. Cases like this are not abstractions. They're wounds that never quite heal. The ongoing public attention, the billboards, and the Facebook page are efforts to keep those wounds in the public eye and, hopefully, to prompt someone with information to come forward. Sometimes the smallest memory recalled from that day can break a case open.
Let's talk about the leading theories. And I want us to be careful, Marcus. Separate what we know from what we don't, and lay out for listeners where the evidence supports each theory. First, the runaway or voluntary trip theory. It's largely based on the letter and the neat car. What argues against it?
Several things. Age and circumstances. Julie, being 9, makes willful disappearance implausible. Renee had a party that night and had just received a promise ring. She seemed excited to go. Rachel was married and attending school. The families uniformly reject the idea. Also, presents and school books in the car suggest the girls intended to return. So, while the letter superficially supports that theory, the broader context undermines it.
Okay, second theory. A stranger abduction at the mall or in the parking lot. The busy, noisy environment could mask an abduction, right? It's theoretically possible.
Yes, it's possible. The mall was busy, security presence limited, and there were no CCTV systems like today. A stranger could have used a quick ruse or targeted them. But we lack a credible eyewitness account of a violent public abduction. No screams recorded in contemporaneous news, no one definitively reporting a forced entry. That absence doesn't disprove a stranger abduction, but it leaves gaps.
Third theory, and one family member, Terry Moseley, has voiced this, someone they knew convinced them to leave. Marcus, that fits some of the oddities, right?
It does. If a trusted person approached the girls, they might leave willingly, which would explain lack of a visible struggle or dramatic scene. A known person might also have the knowledge reflected in the letter or access to knowledge of the car location. This theory explains why 3 girls, including a 9-year-old, might go off together without raising immediate alarm. But so far, no public records show a charged suspect who fits that description.
There's also discussion in the public sphere about possible links to other predators or serial offenders from that era. We should be explicit. There is no confirmed, official link between the trio's disappearance and any specific serial killer in public records. That remains speculation in many online forums.
Yes, and we should be cautious with that line. It's tempting to connect unsolved cases by pattern, but without solid evidentiary ties, DNA, credible confessions, eyewitness linkage, it's just speculation and can misdirect attention from locally relevant leads.
Another possible angle, the letter writer being the perpetrator. The letter contained accurate information, but handwriting experts were inconclusive. Families view it as a red herring. If the writer was the perpetrator, they might have tried to insert a misleading narrative. But it could also be someone with inside information who wasn't the abductor. We simply don't know.
Right. The inaccuracy or oddities in the postmark and zip code make the letter even stranger. Whoever wrote it either wanted to be found, wanted to mislead, or was confused. The inconclusive handwriting analysis means it can't be used as definitive proof either way.
Let's step back and think about modern avenues. About the only realistic paths now are a credible confession, discovery of remains that can be DNA tested, or preserved physical evidence that can be reanalyzed with modern forensics. There were searches of Benbrook Lake, where cars were pulled. None proved connected. Rusty fished at many lakes. Billboards were put up. Social media and renewed attention might generate tips. Marcus, is there any other realistic route to resolution?
Those are the main ones. Re-examining any preserved physical evidence, if it exists and is properly stored, could yield DNA or trace material. Partial fingerprints can be rechecked against modern AFIS. But realistically, for a case this old, a credible witness coming forward or an admission with verifiable details is often what breaks it. A lot depends on people's conscience, aging, and changing loyalties. Someone who wouldn't have talked in 1975 might talk decades later.
You mentioned resources earlier. Fort Worth PD's cold case unit has about 1,000 cases. Families feel forgotten. The practical reality is there are limits. That's painful to say out loud on a show like this, but it's part of the systemic picture.
It is, and it underscores a larger point. Solving cold cases often relies on community memory, institutional memory, and a capacity to triage new information. When units are overwhelmed, even credible leads can languish. So public pressure, media attention, and targeted funding can play significant roles in focusing attention back on a case like this.
I want to throw in a small moment here. By the way, I grew up in North Texas. I practically exist in the shadow of mall culture from the 70s and 80s. The idea that a Saturday at Seminary South could end with 3 people just vanishing, it's the kind of thing that makes you walk a little closer with your kids, you know?
Yeah, those cultural touchstones make the fear tangible. Malls were social hubs then. No CCTV, fewer adults watching. So the disappearance has a generational resonance. It helped shape the public's later appetite for systems like Amber Alerts and other protective measures.
Let's talk briefly about media involvement. The family used the press to keep the girls' faces in front of the public. Dateline and local outlets ran stories. Billboards around the 50-year anniversary aimed to regenerate tips. But coverage can also attract false confessors and attention seekers.
That double edge is hard. Media can keep a case alive and spur witnesses to recall details, but it also opens the door to hoaxes. Over the years, many investigations are slowed by time spent debunking false leads. Still, in many cases, media attention has been the catalyst for a break when someone suddenly recognizes a detail and comes forward.
We've talked about the major elements: the car, the letter, the mall, the theories, the families, the institutional landscape, modern options to move the case. I want to read the central line from the letter again because it's one of those haunting artifacts. I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is in the Sears upper lot. Love, Rachel. That line has been parsed endlessly, and still, we're not closer to an answer.
It's chilling because it sounds so matter-of-fact. It's mundane and devastating at once. The specificity about the car's location gives it an air of authenticity, and the sign-off with a name provides a false intimacy. The human brain wants to slot it into a narrative. Either the girls left, or someone wants us to believe they did. But the family's knowledge of the girls' characters weighs heavily against the note's claim.
We have to acknowledge the emotional reality, the holiday trauma. Many relatives mark Christmas with symbolism: 3 lighted angels, photos, memories. The parents now gone, survivors aging. The families tell reporters that they don't expect an answer in their lifetime, but they still hope. Marcus, how do you counsel families in such long-running cases?
With humility and realism. Listen to them first. Their lived knowledge is invaluable. Encourage preservation of any physical items, documentation of tips and leads, and engagement with media only on terms that feel respectful. And, perhaps most important, help them prepare for the psychological toll. Unresolved grief is different from grief with closure. Encourage support groups, therapy, and realistic boundaries around how much a family member can do without burning out.
Those are important, practical recommendations. Now, for listeners who might feel compelled to help, Fort Worth PD still asks anyone with information to come forward, no matter how small the memory. That's a consistent plea across reporting. Someone remembering an odd vehicle, a face in the parking lot, or a strange conversation could matter.
And even if you aren't sure the detail is relevant, report it. Investigators can weigh the credibility and check whether details align with known facts. Sometimes the tiniest, seemingly irrelevant recollection turns out to be the missing link.
Before we close, I want to go through a very quick recap of the hard facts so listeners leave with a clear picture. The who, the when, the where. Rachel Trlica, 17. Renee Wilson, 14. Julie Moseley, 9. Disappeared December 23, 1974. Seminary South Shopping Center in Fort Worth. Rachel's 1972 Oldsmobile 98 found in the Sears parking lot with gifts and books inside. A letter arrived December 24th claiming they'd gone to Houston. Handwriting analysis inconclusive. Families reject the runaway theory. Thousands of leads, hundreds interviewed, dozens of searches, no resolution. The case sits in Fort Worth's cold case unit, which juggles around 1,000 open cases.
That recap is right on. I'd add that despite decades of work, no public record confirms a link to another known offender, and the emotional toll on the families is profound. The most plausible pathways to resolution now are preserved evidence yielding DNA or fingerprints, a credible confession, or remains discovered and identified. But, and this is important, public memory and vigilance still play a role.
I want to pause and let listeners take that in. Marcus, one last question. If you could speak directly to someone who knows something and has lived with that secret for 50 years, what would you say?
I'd say, your conscience has been carrying a heavy load for a long time. There is no way to undo the past, but providing truthful information now could relieve some of that load and, more importantly, offer the families a measure of justice and closure they've been denied. Law enforcement has mechanisms to evaluate and corroborate claims. Honesty now matters. Please come forward.
Yeah, and I would say the families have lived with this Christmas every year like a wound. If you know anything at all, even a fragment, please say it. We'll include Fort Worth PD contact details in the episode notes. I'll also say this. If you're listening and you're a member of the Fort Worth community, keep their faces in mind this season. That little nudge of memory could make a difference.
And for our listeners who work in policing or forensics, advocate for cold case resources wherever you are. A well-resourced unit can keep pressure on long-running cases in a way that honors victims and families.
We're closing now. This case has no tidy ending tonight. That's the point. Some stories remain unfinished, and that's a kind of suffering we have to hold with care. Marcus, thank you for your insights, your clarity, and your compassion.
Thank you, Elena. It's important we keep these stories in the light.
If you have tips about the Fort Worth missing trio, contact the Fort Worth Police Department. If you need to talk after this episode because these stories hit close to home, reach out to local support services. We'll keep reporting, keep asking questions, and keep the focus where it belongs, on Rachel, Renee, and Julie. For now, from Fort Worth, I'm Elena Cortez. Marcus, Ellison, thank you. And to our listeners, be careful and be kind.
Bye for now.